A safe house in the old port district of Marseille? Three Egyptian intelligence officers gathered around a table covered with encrypted communications, false passports, and surveillance photographs of Israeli diplomats operating across southern France. The room smells of Turkish coffee and cigarette smoke. Maps of Toulon naval base cover one wall. Shipping manifests from Haifa port are spread across another table. This is the operational center of Egypt's most active intelligence cell in Europe. And the men inside believe they're invisible. What they don't know is that the apartment directly above them has been rented for 2 months by a team that doesn't appear on any official records. That fiber optic cameras no thicker than human hair have been threaded through their ceiling for weeks, transmitting every conversation to analysts in Tel Aviv. That tonight, while they sleep, 6 operatives will enter their safe house, photograph every document, clone every hard drive, and plant listening devices so sophisticated they'll capture whispers from across the room. And the Egyptian officers will wake tomorrow morning with no idea their entire network has been compromised. This was infiltration perfected. Silent, total, executed in the heart of France while police patrolled streets 3 blocks away. The locksmith tested the door handle one final time before packing his tools. What he installed and what he reported to building management would trigger the final phase of an operation 8 months in preparation. The intelligence machinery of penetration had been set in motion when Signals Intercept detected unusual encrypted traffic originating from this address in Marseille's 2nd arrondissement. By the time Egyptian intelligence established their cell in this 19th century building overlooking the viewport, Israeli technical specialists had already mapped every entrance, every security measure, every pattern of movement in and out. This is the story of how intelligence services transform buildings into theaters of espionage. How surveillance becomes the architecture of penetration, and how an entire spy network can be exposed in a single night while the officers running it sleep 3 floors below the team dismantling their operation. It reveals something darker than tactical success. The existence of a global system where sovereignty means nothing, where physical security is an illusion, and where the difference between hunter and hunted can be measured in the thickness of a ceiling and the skill of the team operating silently above it. Understanding how the Marseille network was penetrated requires understanding why Egyptian intelligence established operations in southern France and why Israel considered its destruction a strategic priority. The story begins not in Marseille but in Cairo, in the offices of Egyptian military intelligence, where analysts recognized a vulnerability in Israel's Mediterranean strategy. Israeli naval operations depended heavily on the port of Haifa and the submarine base at Idlib. These facilities handled weapons shipments from Germany and the United States, coordinated naval exercises with NATO allies, and served as the home port for Israel's Dolphin-class submarines, rumored to carry nuclear weapons as part of the country's second strike capability. For Egyptian intelligence, gathering information about Israeli naval capabilities represented both strategic necessity and historical resentment. The wars of 67 and 73 had demonstrated Israeli naval superiority in the Mediterranean. Egyptian ships had been sunk, ports blockaded, and coastal installations bombarded while Egyptian forces struggled to mount effective counterattacks. Decades later, the military imbalance persisted. Israel maintained technological superiority through American and German military aid while Egypt's fleet aged and struggled with maintenance. Intelligence collection became a way to offset material disadvantage, understanding Israeli capabilities even if Egypt couldn't match them. The decision to establish a collection network in Marseille reflected sophisticated operational planning. France maintained complex relationships in the Mediterranean, officially friendly with Israel while maintaining extensive commercial and diplomatic ties with Arab states. The large North African immigrant population in Marseille and other southern French cities provided cover for Arab intelligence officers who could blend into communities where their presence seemed natural rather than suspicious. And critically, Marseille's position as France's largest Mediterranean port meant regular maritime traffic with Israeli ports, creating opportunities to observe Israeli naval movements and recruit sources with access to sensitive facilities. The network was established in 2015 under the cover of a maritime shipping consultancy. The front company, registered as Medmar Logistics, claimed to advise North African businesses on European shipping regulations. The business had minimal actual commercial activity but sufficient legitimate clients to justify its existence to French authorities. 3 Egyptian intelligence officers operated under business cover, renting office space and the apartment that served as their actual operational center. They'd been careful in their selection of the safe house, choosing a building in a neighborhood where residents minded their own business and turnover was high enough that new faces didn't attract attention. The cell's primary targets were threefold. First, they cultivated sources among dockworkers at Marseille port who could observe and photograph Israeli vessels during port calls. Israeli warships visited Marseille occasionally for joint exercises or courtesy calls, and each visit provided opportunities to assess capabilities and gather technical intelligence. Second, they monitored Israeli diplomatic communications by targeting the consulate in Marseille, attempting to recruit French nationals working in communications or security who might provide access. Third, they established relationships with shipping company employees who handled cargo manifests for vessels traveling between French and Israeli ports, potentially revealing patterns in military shipments disguised as commercial cargo. For 3 years, the network operated successfully from Cairo's perspective. They filed regular intelligence reports documenting Israeli naval activities, shipping patterns, and diplomatic communications that had been intercepted or acquired through human sources. Egyptian analysts used this information to build assessments of Israeli military posture and to brief naval commanders on likely Israeli capabilities. The network's success led Cairo to expand its ambitions, directing the cell to begin recruiting additional sources and potentially establishing subcells in Toulon, home of France's main naval base where Israeli vessels sometimes docked. This expansion would prove fatal. The increased activity generated more communications traffic, more meetings with potential sources, more movements that could be observed and analyzed. Israeli signals intelligence detected an unusual volume of encrypted traffic between Marseille and Cairo in late 2017. The encryption protocols were sophisticated, not easily broken, but the pattern itself was revealing. The traffic volume, timing, and characteristics suggested an active intelligence operation. Analysts in Tel Aviv flagged Marseille as a priority for counterintelligence investigation. Identifying the physical location of the Egyptian cell required months of patient technical work. Israeli signals intelligence worked with French counterparts, though without revealing the full scope of their investigation, to narrow the geographic origin of the encrypted transmissions to several square blocks in the second arrondissement. Physical surveillance teams deployed to Marseille under various covers began systematic observation of the target area. They photographed everyone entering or leaving buildings, noted unusual patterns, identified apartments where lights burned late into the night, and slowly constructed a map of human activity. The breakthrough came when technical specialists detected electronic emissions consistent with burst transmission equipment, devices that compress data and transmit it in brief high-speed bursts to minimize interception risk. The emissions originated from the specific building overlooking the viewport. Further investigation revealed that an apartment in that building was rented to Medmar Logistics, a shipping consultancy with a suspiciously thin commercial footprint. Background checks on the company's principals revealed inconsistencies in their business histories. Surveillance of the 3 men associated with the company showed patterns consistent with intelligence operations, frequent changes of cell phones, surveillance detection routes before sensitive meetings, and contacts with individuals later identified as having access to ports and diplomatic facilities. By mid-2018, Israeli intelligence had confirmed that the apartment housed an active Egyptian intelligence cell. The question became what to do with this information. The straightforward approach would be providing evidence to French counterintelligence, allowing DGSI to arrest the officers and roll up the network. But this approach had limitations. Arrests would be public, creating a diplomatic incident between France and Egypt. More importantly, arrests would reveal to Egyptian intelligence that their network had been compromised, allowing them to warn other cells and potentially identify the penetration method. Israeli planners wanted something different. They wanted to compromise the network completely while leaving it operational, turning it from an Egyptian intelligence asset into an Israeli counterintelligence goldmine. The operation planned over the following months was extraordinarily ambitious. Rather than simply destroying the Egyptian network, Mossad's technical specialists would break into the safe house, copy every document, clone every computer and hard drive, photograph every item, and plant sophisticated listening devices that would allow real-time monitoring of all future activities. The Egyptian officers would continue operating, unaware that everything they did was now visible to Israeli intelligence. Cairo would continue receiving reports from what they believed was a successful network, while Tel Aviv read every communication, identified every source, and fed disinformation through channels they now controlled. The technical challenges were immense. The safe house was located on the third floor of a 6-story building with a single stairwell and one elevator. The Egyptian officers maintained irregular schedules but were home most nights. The building had basic security: a locked front entrance requiring a code or key, but no cameras or guards. The safe house door itself had been reinforced by the Egyptians with a high security lock and likely had additional internal security measures. Any break-in would need to be completely silent, leave no trace, and be completed within the narrow window when all 3 officers were confirmed to be elsewhere. The solution developed by Mossad's Technical Operations Unit was elegant. Rather than breaking into the safe house through its reinforced door, they would access it from above. The apartment directly above the Egyptian safe house was occupied by an elderly French woman who traveled frequently to visit family in Lyon. Over 2 months, Israeli operatives established a pattern of observing her movements. In September 2018, when she departed for one of her regular week-long visits, a team moved into action. The building superintendent was approached by a well-dressed man, claiming to represent the owner of a vacant apartment on the 5th floor. He wanted to lease it immediately and was willing to pay 6 months' rent in advance, cash. The superintendent, seeing no reason to refuse easy money, provided access without the usual background checks. With the 5th floor apartment secured as a command post, technical specialists began the delicate work of preparing the access route. Using fiber optic cameras and sound detection equipment, they mapped the interior layout of the 4th floor apartment belonging to the elderly French woman. When she departed for Lyon on October 15th, a team entered her apartment using lockpicks that left no trace. Over 2 days, they carefully cut a small access hole through her floor, through the ceiling void and into the ceiling of the safe house below. The hole was only 8 inches in diameter, too small for human access but sufficient for cameras and other technical equipment. Fiber optic cameras were threaded through the hole, giving Israeli intelligence their first direct visual access to the Egyptian safe house interior. What they saw exceeded expectations. The apartment had been converted into a professional intelligence operations center. One room served as a communications hub with encrypted transmission equipment and multiple computers. Another room was dedicated to document storage with filing cabinets full of source reports, surveillance photographs, and operational plans. A third room appeared to be a meeting space with a large table where the officers conducted briefings and analyzed intelligence. The apartment was a treasure trove of information about Egyptian intelligence operations across Europe. For 3 weeks, Israeli analysts studied the video feeds, learning the routines of the 3 Egyptian officers, identifying when they were most likely to be out of the apartment simultaneously, and noting the locations of sensitive materials that would need to be photographed during the actual penetration. The technical challenge of accessing the safe house without alerting the Egyptians required solving several problems. The reinforced door was off limits, too risky and time-consuming. The windows overlooked a busy street where work at night would be visible. That left only one option: entering through the ceiling from the apartment above. The break-in was scheduled for November 7, 2018. Egyptian signals intelligence intercepts revealed that all 3 officers would be attending a meeting with a source in Toulon that evening, giving the penetration team approximately 6 hours from their departure until their expected return. The operation required perfect coordination between surveillance teams tracking the Egyptians, the penetration team executing the break-in, and technical specialists analyzing what was being copied in real time to ensure nothing was missed. At 1700 hours, surveillance confirmed all three Egyptian officers departing the building and driving toward Toulon. The penetration team, which had been positioned in the fifth-floor command post for 12 hours, immediately began final preparations. The team consisted of 6 specialists. 2 were responsible for physical security, ensuring no interruptions from neighbors or unexpected returns. 2 were technical specialists who would handle the photography and computer cloning. 1 was a documents expert trained in quickly identifying and prioritizing the most sensitive materials. And 1 was the team leader coordinating with surveillance teams and managing the operation timeline. At 1730, exactly 30 minutes after the Egyptians departed, the team began enlarging the access hole in the fourth-floor apartment's floor. Using specialized tools that cut through plaster and wood with minimal noise, they expanded the opening to 24 inches, sufficient for team members to lower themselves through the ceiling void and into the safe house below. Dust and debris were carefully collected to prevent any evidence of the intrusion. By 1800 hours, the access point was ready. The descent into the safe house was the most dangerous phase. The drop from the ceiling void to the safe house floor was approximately 10 feet. Team members lowered themselves on climbing rope, dropping silently onto furniture positioned to minimize noise and impact. Once inside, they moved with practiced efficiency, each specialist proceeding directly to their assigned tasks. The 2 technical specialists went to the communications room where computers and transmission equipment were located. The documents expert headed to the filing cabinet. The physical security specialists positioned themselves to monitor the apartment entrance and maintain communication with surveillance teams tracking the Egyptians. The technical specialists began by photographing the room exactly as it was, creating a visual record that would allow them to restore everything to its original position before departing. Then they began the systematic process of cloning hard drives and copying encrypted communications. The computers were equipped with full disk encryption, a significant obstacle but not insurmountable. Using specialized hardware that could image encrypted drives, they created complete copies that could be analyzed later by cryptographic specialists in Tel Aviv. Each computer required approximately 40 minutes to fully clone, a race against time as the 6-hour window slowly depleted. Simultaneously, the documents expert worked through filing cabinets with extraordinary speed, photographing each page of hundreds of documents using a specialized camera that could capture high-resolution images in low light. The documents revealed the full scope of Egyptian intelligence operations in southern France. Source files with true names of French nationals providing information to the network. Operational plans for recruiting additional sources at French naval facilities. Communications with Cairo outlining intelligence requirements and reporting successes. Technical specifications of Israeli naval vessels collected through source reporting. It was a comprehensive map of Egyptian intelligence activities that would allow Israeli counterintelligence to identify and potentially turn every source in the network. One discovery particularly excited the team leader. Among the documents was a roster of Egyptian intelligence officers operating undercover across Europe, not just in France but in Italy, Spain, and Greece. The document included true names, cover identities, and contact protocols. This single document would allow Israeli intelligence to identify Egyptian operations across the Mediterranean, potentially compromising dozens of officers Cairo believed were operating securely. The team leader immediately transmitted images of this document back to Tel Aviv, marking it as priority intelligence. By 2100 hours, 4 hours into the operation, the technical specialists had completed cloning 3 computers and were working on the 4th. The documents expert had photographed approximately 80% of the files. The team was ahead of schedule but vigilant about the timeline. Surveillance teams reported the Egyptian officers were still in Toulon but could depart at any time. The penetration team needed to complete their work, install listening devices, restore the safe house to its original condition, and extract through the ceiling before the Egyptians returned. The listening devices installed were remarkable pieces of technology. Smaller than a matchbox, they were powered by miniature batteries that could operate for up to 2 years. They transmitted on frequencies designed to blend with normal electromagnetic noise in urban environments, making detection difficult even with sophisticated counter-surveillance equipment. The team installed 6 devices throughout the safe house, positioning them to capture conversations in the communications room, the meeting room, and the living spaces where the officers spent personal time. Once activated, these devices would provide Israeli intelligence with real-time audio surveillance of everything occurring in the safe house. By 22:30 hours, the technical work was complete. Every computer had been cloned, every document photographed, and every listening device installed. Now came the equally critical task of restoration. Using the photographs taken at the beginning of the operation, team members carefully returned every item to its exact original position. Papers were restacked in precise order. Computers were returned to exact angles on desks. Even small items like pens and coffee cups were repositioned to match the photographic record. The objective was to leave absolutely no indication that anyone had been present. At 2300 hours, surveillance teams reported that the Egyptian officers had left Toulon and were driving back toward Marseille. Estimated time of arrival at the safe house was midnight, giving the penetration team 60 minutes to complete restoration and extract. The team worked with disciplined speed, conducting final checks to ensure nothing was out of place. The team leader walked through each room, comparing the current state to the photographs, identifying tiny discrepancies that could alert observant intelligence officers that something was wrong. At 23:45, satisfied that restoration was complete, the team began extraction. Using the climbing rope still positioned through the ceiling access point, team members pulled themselves up through the ceiling void and into the 4th-floor apartment above. Once all 6 were safely up, they carefully pulled the rope through and began closing the access point. The enlarged hole was covered with a precisely cut piece of plaster painted to match the surrounding ceiling. From below, unless someone looked extremely carefully directly at that spot, the repair would be invisible. By 23:55, all team members were in the 5th-floor command post, monitoring via fiber optic cameras as the Egyptian officers returned to their safe house. The Egyptians entered at 5 minutes past midnight, appearing tired but unsuspicious. They moved through the apartment, one checking the communications equipment, another making tea in the kitchen, the third going directly to bed. None noticed anything unusual. The penetration had been perfect. Over the following weeks, Israeli analysts in Tel Aviv processed the intelligence goldmine extracted from the Marseille safe house. The cloned hard drives, once the encryption was broken through brute force computing and cryptographic analysis, revealed years of Egyptian intelligence reporting. Analysts could trace the evolution of the network from its establishment in 2015 through its expansion and increasing ambition. They identified every source the Egyptians had recruited, every operation they had conducted, every piece of intelligence they had collected. More importantly, they could now see Egyptian intelligence priorities, understanding what Cairo cared about most and what gaps existed in Egyptian knowledge. The source roster proved devastatingly valuable. Israeli counterintelligence identified 12 French nationals who had been providing information to the Egyptian network. Rather than arresting these sources immediately, which would alert Cairo that the network had been compromised, Israeli intelligence worked with French counterparts to mount influence operations. Some sources were approached and turned, becoming double agents feeding disinformation back through the Egyptian network. Others were monitored closely, their communications intercepted, allowing Israeli intelligence to understand exactly what information was flowing to Cairo. A few sources who couldn't be turned or controlled were quietly removed from positions where they had access to sensitive information, reassigned to different roles without explanation that might alert Egyptian intelligence. The listening devices installed in the safe house provided real-time intelligence on Egyptian operations. Every planning meeting, every communication with Cairo, every discussion of sources and operations was captured and analyzed. Israeli intelligence could anticipate Egyptian intelligence moves before they happened, positioning countermeasures or allowing operations to proceed when doing so served Israeli interests. The Egyptian network in Marseille had been transformed from a threat into an asset, a window into Egyptian intelligence thinking that provided strategic advantage. The decision was made not to destroy the network but to manipulate it. Israeli technical specialists, using their comprehensive understanding of Egyptian operations, began subtle influence campaigns. Documents were allowed to be discovered by Egyptian sources that contained accurate information mixed with carefully crafted disinformation. The disinformation was designed to mislead Egyptian analysts about Israeli naval capabilities and intentions without being obvious enough to trigger suspicion. For example, documents might overstate the operational readiness of Israeli submarines, leading Egyptian naval planners to allocate resources to countering threats that were exaggerated. Or shipping manifests might be altered to suggest weapon systems were being delivered to Israeli ports when in fact those systems didn't exist or were being delivered elsewhere. For 18 months, from November 2018 through April 2020, the compromised Egyptian network operated with its officers completely unaware they were under total surveillance. The 3 Egyptian intelligence officers continued their work, recruiting sources, collecting intelligence, filing reports to Cairo that they believed were contributing to Egyptian security. In reality, every move they made was visible to Israeli counterintelligence. Every source they recruited was identified and controlled. Every piece of intelligence they collected was either already known to Israel or deliberately allowed to be discovered as part of the manipulation campaign. The operation finally concluded not because the Egyptians detected the compromise, but because Israeli intelligence decided the strategic value had been extracted and maintaining the operation risked exposure. In April 2020, Israeli intelligence provided French counterintelligence with evidence of Egyptian espionage activities in Marseille, carefully curated to exclude any indication that the network had been under Israeli surveillance. French authorities arrested the 3 Egyptian officers and expelled them as persona non grata. The arrests were reported as a French counterintelligence success, with no public mention of Israeli involvement. From Cairo's perspective, the network's destruction was a counterintelligence failure, but not a catastrophic compromise. They assumed French services had detected the operation through routine surveillance or a tip from one of the sources. They had no reason to believe the network had been completely penetrated for 18 months. Egyptian intelligence conducted damage assessment, trying to determine what the French had learned, but their analysis was based on false assumptions. They assumed the compromise was recent and limited rather than total and sustained. This misunderstanding prevented them from taking adequate measures to protect other operations and officers, potentially exposed through the Marseille network. For Israeli intelligence, the Marseille operation was considered one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in decades. Not only had they identified and neutralized an Egyptian network, but they had exploited it for strategic advantage over an extended period. The intelligence gain provided insights into Egyptian military thinking, intelligence priorities, and operational capabilities that influenced Israeli strategic planning. The operation demonstrated that sophisticated, technical operations combined with patient exploitation could achieve results far beyond simple network destruction. The broader implications extended beyond the tactical success. The operation revealed vulnerabilities in how intelligence services establish and maintain operational security. The Egyptian network had followed reasonable security protocols, using encrypted communications, maintaining cover identities, compartmenting operations to limit exposure if compromised. Yet these measures proved insufficient against a determined adversary with technical capabilities to penetrate physical security from unexpected vectors. The lesson for intelligence services worldwide was sobering. No safe house is truly safe. No encryption is unbreakable given enough computing power and time. No operation is invisible if an adversary dedicates sufficient resources to finding it. The technical aspects of the Marseille penetration became classified case studies in intelligence training programs. The method of accessing the safe house from above rather than through. Conventional entry points demonstrated creative problem solving. The use of extended surveillance before penetration, spending months learning routines and identifying optimal timing, reflected the patience required for successful technical operations. The comprehensive nature of the exploitation, copying everything rather than stealing selected materials, showed the value of non-destructive intelligence collection that leaves the target unaware of compromise. The ethics of the operation remained debated within intelligence communities. Conducting such an intrusive operation on French soil without informing French authorities violated France's sovereignty. Israeli intelligence operated unilaterally on the territory of an ally, conducting what amounted to a covert action against a third country's intelligence service. When Israeli intelligence eventually shared information leading to the arrests, French counterintelligence officials were reportedly furious upon learning the full scope of Israeli operations conducted without their knowledge or consent. The incident strained intelligence cooperation between France and Israel for several years. Yet from Israel's perspective, the operation was justified by security imperatives. Egyptian intelligence was actively collecting information on Israeli naval capabilities that could potentially inform military planning against Israel. The network's success in recruiting French sources demonstrated that Egyptian intelligence posed a real threat. Neutralizing that threat while extracting maximum intelligence value served Israeli security interests. The fact that the operation occurred on French soil was unfortunate, but necessary given where the Egyptian network had established itself. The 3 Egyptian intelligence officers expelled from France returned to Cairo expecting consequences for the network's exposure. Instead, they were debriefed extensively about French counterintelligence capabilities, then reassigned to desk jobs where they could do less damage. Egyptian intelligence reviewed procedures for establishing safe houses and conducting operations in hostile environments, implementing new security protocols designed to prevent similar compromises. But because they never understood the true nature of the Marseille Compromise, many of the new protocols addressed problems that hadn't actually caused the exposure. The elderly French woman whose apartment was used as an access point never learned her home had been central to an intelligence operation. When she returned from Lyon and noticed a small repair in her ceiling, she assumed building maintenance had fixed a leak and thought nothing more of it. The 5th-floor apartment leased as a command post was abandoned after the operation concluded, its rental period expiring naturally without renewal. The building superintendent who accepted cash for quick rental never knew he had facilitated an intelligence operation, simply filing the transaction as one of many routine business dealings. The sources recruited by the Egyptian network faced varied fates depending on French and Israeli decisions about their handling. Some were prosecuted for espionage after French authorities built cases against them using evidence that appeared to come from routine counterintelligence work rather than Israeli penetration of the network. Others were quietly approached by French intelligence and offered choices: face prosecution or cooperate in counterintelligence operations. Several chose cooperation, becoming double agents who continued providing information that served French and Israeli interests rather than Egyptian. A few sources, whose activities were judged minor and who couldn't be effectively prosecuted or turned, were left in place but monitored closely to ensure they no longer provided sensitive information. The listening devices planted in the safe house were recovered by French counterintelligence during post-arrest searches of the apartment. When technical specialists examined these devices, they recognized immediately that they were far more sophisticated than Egyptian intelligence would typically deploy. The devices bore none of the usual indicators of commercial surveillance equipment. Their frequencies and transmission protocols suggested state-level technical capabilities. French counterintelligence concluded correctly that a third party, almost certainly Israeli intelligence, had penetrated the safe house before French authorities arrested the Egyptian officers. This discovery confirmed French suspicions that they had been kept in the dark about Allied intelligence operations on their territory. The diplomatic fallout was managed through quiet channels. French officials protested to their Israeli counterparts about conducting operations on French soil without coordination. Israeli officials offered neither confirmation nor denial but expressed general appreciation for French counterintelligence capabilities in identifying foreign intelligence threats. The conversation was sufficiently vague that no formal admission of Israeli operations occurred, allowing both sides to manage the incident without public confrontation. French officials privately implemented new security protocols designed to detect similar operations in the future, while Israeli intelligence noted French sensitivities for consideration in future operations requiring action on French territory. Egyptian intelligence, still unaware of the full scope of the compromise, continued operating networks in other European cities using similar methodologies. Israeli counterintelligence, armed with insights from the Marseille operation, could now identify potential Egyptian networks by recognizing patterns in how they were established and operated. Over the following years, several additional Egyptian networks were identified across Europe. Some were compromised and exploited in ways similar to Marseille. Others were reported to host nation authorities for dismantling. The cumulative effect was a significant degradation of Egyptian intelligence collection capabilities in Europe, forcing Cairo to reassess its entire operational approach. The success of the Marseille operation elevated the reputations of the Israeli intelligence officers who planned and executed it. The team leader received internal recognition within Mossad for exceptional operational performance. The technical specialists who designed the ceiling penetration method were brought into planning for other operations where similar creative approaches might prove valuable. The analysts who processed the intelligence extracted from the safe house were promoted to positions where their analytical insights could inform broader strategic assessments. In intelligence services, successful operations become currency that advances careers and establishes reputations. For observers of intelligence activities, the Marseille operation illustrates several enduring realities about modern espionage. First, physical security remains vulnerable to creative approaches. The Egyptian network had secured their door but never considered that the greatest vulnerability might be their ceiling. Second, extended surveillance provides understanding that enables successful exploitation. The months Israeli intelligence spent observing before acting allowed them to penetrate the safe house with confidence. Third, the most valuable counterintelligence operations aren't necessarily those that destroy enemy networks, but those that compromise and control them. The year and a half of intelligence gained from the manipulated network exceeded the value of simply arresting the 3 officers. The technological capabilities demonstrated in the operation also highlight the gap between top-tier intelligence services and others. The fiber optic cameras, the hard drive cloning equipment, the listening devices that remained undetected for months, all represented technical sophistication that required substantial resources to develop and deploy. Not every intelligence service can conduct operations at this level. The technological advantage provides countries like Israel with capabilities that multiply the effectiveness of their intelligence operations while making detection and counteraction by less technologically advanced adversaries extremely difficult. The human element remained central despite the technical sophistication. The operation succeeded because intelligence officers made correct judgments about when and how to act. They correctly assessed that the Egyptian network was worth the risks of penetration. They correctly identified the ceiling access method as viable. They correctly estimated the time required for exploitation and extraction. They correctly judged that the intelligence value justified operating on Allied territory without coordination. These judgments required experience, expertise, and willingness to take calculated risks. No amount of technology replaces human decision-making in complex operations where variables constantly shift. The story of the Marseille safe house penetration will never be publicly acknowledged by Israeli intelligence in any official capacity. The operation remains classified, known only through careful analysis of circumstantial evidence and occasional informed leaks that suggested something significant occurred in Marseille around 2018. The French officials who dealt with the aftermath are bound by secrecy agreements that prevent discussing details. The Egyptian intelligence officers involved were debriefed under conditions that discouraged them from discussing their experiences. Yet, within intelligence communities worldwide, the operation is understood and studied as an example of what becomes possible when technical capability meets operational creativity. For the residents of the building overlooking Marseille's viewport where all this unfolded, life continued normally after the Egyptian officers were expelled. New tenants moved into the third-floor apartment, unaware of its previous use. The fourth-floor apartment is still occupied by the elderly French woman who travels regularly to Lyon. The fifth-floor apartment that served as command post has housed several tenants since 2018, none knowing the role their home played in an intelligence operation. The building stands as it always has. ordinary and unremarkable, containing no visible traces of the espionage that unfolded within its walls. What the night of November 7, 2018 revealed about the world of intelligence is that physical spaces offer no guaranteed security, that ceiling and walls can be penetrated by those with sufficient skill and motivation, that encrypted communications and secured doors provide only the illusion of safety against adversaries with patience and resources, and that the difference between a secure safe house and a compromised operation can come down to whether anyone thought to look up at the ceiling and wonder what might be possible from the floor above. The Egyptian intelligence officers in Marseille learned these lessons too late. Their network destroyed not by any mistake they made, but by the simple reality that they faced an adversary who thought more creatively about how to reach them than they thought about how to protect themselves. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this deep dive into covert operations made you see intelligence work differently, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe, because we're exposing the operations that governments deny and the machinery of espionage that operates in perpetual shadow. Hit the notification bell. The next buried operation is already unfolding somewhere, waiting to be revealed.